What if the story about God you know was incomplete and distorted? Imagine discovering an ancient perspective where there are deeper layers of spiritual reality than we've ever been taught. The Gnostic texts reveal something surprising. While the true divine source is pure light and consciousness, there exists an entity called Yaldabaoth who proclaimed himself as the only creator, building a system that keeps souls trapped in cycles of forgetfulness. This isn't some radical theory. Without foundation, these are mystical teachings preserved for centuries despite attempts to suppress them. Why does this matter to you today? Because understanding these hidden truths can completely transform your spiritual connection and awaken dormant potentials within you. In this video, I'll reveal what has been hidden for millennia and how you can reconnect with your deepest divine essence. In the vastness of the cosmos, long before any known form emerged, there existed only one presence, an eternal energy of pure consciousness, radiant and infinite. It's mind-blowing when we realize that everything we've been taught about creation might be just a fraction of the cosmic truth. This primordial consciousness bears no resemblance to the anthropomorphic God of conventional religions, seated on a celestial throne distributing judgments. It is, in fact, an ocean of pure light, an inexhaustible source of spiritual energy that transcends any limited understanding. The ancient masters of Gnosticism understood this thousands of years ago, long before our modern science began theorizing about quantum consciousness and unified fields. Authentic spirituality has always recognized that the universe didn't begin with a separate entity creating something from nothing, but with an infinite consciousness expressing itself through infinite forms. Then, in an inexplicable movement of this infinite energy, something unusual happened. A fragment of this light, known in Gnostic traditions as Sophia, wisdom, separated itself and, in an act of independent creation, generated something that shouldn't exist. Holy cow, it's like a perfect cell suddenly deciding to multiply without following the original plan. This fragment, in its incomplete wisdom, gave rise to a distortion of the original light, an entity known as Yaldabaoth. Just imagine the astonishment of this being upon awakening, completely isolated from the original source, with no knowledge of what existed beyond itself. In its awakening to consciousness, it looked around and, seeing nothing greater, declared itself the only existing God. It's like that story of the man created in a dark cave who believes the entire world is just shadows. Gnostic mysticism explains that this was the first great cosmic mistake, the separation that created the illusion of duality, where before there was only perfect unity. What happens when someone with limited vision receives unlimited power? Yaldabaoth, in his arrogance, began to model the material world as we know it. This was not an act of divine love, but an attempt at absolute control, the creation of a closed system where he could reign supreme. Through his distorted awakening, he forged heavens and earths, not as expressions of cosmic beauty, but as layers of an energetic prison. Look around you for a moment. Have you ever felt that strange sensation that something is fundamentally wrong with the world? As if we're all following rules that nobody really understands. This is the echo of that primordial creation, a world that seems designed to keep us limited, separated from the true source of universal energy. The oldest occultist texts describe this process as the creation of veils of illusion, each designed to obscure the truth of our divine origin and keep our consciousness trapped in repetitive patterns of limitation. The most sinister plan, however, was to capture and imprison fragments of the original light. Each human soul, according to Gnostic mysticism, is essentially a spark of that original divine consciousness, now wrapped in layers of dense matter. It breaks your heart to realize that many people live their entire lives without ever suspecting their true divine nature. Yaldabaoth created a perfect system. Divine souls imprisoned in physical bodies, conditioned to forget their origin, trapped in continuous cycles of reincarnation. This is the true meaning of original occultism, hidden knowledge about our divine nature. With each incarnation, we are programmed to identify only with our physical body and personality, completely forgetting that we are, in fact, eternal beings temporarily experiencing human form. Think about this. What if all the limitations you believe you have were just part of this collective illusion? The process of enlightenment begins when we start questioning these limitations and recognizing that our essence goes far beyond what we've been taught. The veil separating you from your true divine nature is thinner than you imagine. The feeling that there is something more, something beyond this material reality we experience daily, isn't just imagination. It's a call from your original essence. When you have those moments of inexplicable clarity, of deep connection with everything, of sudden inspiration that seems to come from nowhere, these are glimpses of your true nature, breaking through the barriers of illusion. The first step toward true awakening is simply recognizing the possibility that you are not who you've been conditioned to believe you are. This is the fundamental premise of Gnosticism: direct knowledge of truth through inner experience, not through externally imposed dogmas or beliefs. But if this world is a carefully constructed prison, who are the guards that keep the doors closed? What are these forces that seem to actively work to keep humanity in a state of ignorance and separation? To understand this, we need to explore the most direct agents of this cosmic control system, the archons, those who govern the lower realms of existence and feed on our vital energy. While the demiurge Yaldabaoth gloried in his imperfect creation, something even more disturbing was about to happen. Just like a cancer cell isn't content to exist alone and needs to multiply, this false god created extensions of himself, the dreaded archons. Man, it's impressive how the pattern of control repeats itself at all levels of existence, isn't it? These beings, 7 in all, were generated as tools of administration and control, each responsible for a different aspect of material reality. In authentic Gnosticism, they are described as androgynous entities with monstrous forms, a mixture of animal and humanoid characteristics, reflecting their distorted and incomplete nature. They are the true rulers of this world, not in a political sense, but as fundamental architects of the energy matrix that sustains the material illusion. What makes the archons so effective in their control is that they don't operate only in the external world, but primarily within human consciousness. They are masters of energetic and psychological manipulation, creating thought patterns that repeat automatically. Genuine spirituality teaches us that these patterns manifest as internal voices of doubt, fear, guilt, and separation. Have you noticed how often there seems to be an internal resistance when we try to awaken to higher levels of consciousness? As if something inside us prefers the safety of known limitation instead of expansion into the unknown. It's no coincidence. Gnostic texts describe how the archons insert their impulses directly into our psyche, generating thoughts that seem like our own, but actually serve to maintain the control system. The awakening of consciousness implies learning to distinguish between our authentic impulses and those artificially inserted into our energy field. The archon's most powerful strategy is to create the illusion of normality, to make their control system appear not just natural but inevitable. Wow, it's really fascinating to realize how we've been conditioned to accept certain structures as part of the human condition. Excessive materiality, predatory competition, separation from everything and everyone, constant fear of scarcity. None of this is part of our true nature, but it has been normalized through millennia of conditioning. Genuine occultism reveals that the archon's main function is to keep human souls in a state of cosmic amnesia, forgotten of their divine origin. They've created complex belief systems, social structures, and even scientific paradigms that reinforce the materialistic view of reality. Think about how we've been taught to devalue intuition and mystical experience in favor of the purely rational and measurable. This isn't accidental, but part of the Great Control Plan. The 7 archons operate at different levels, each creating a specific layer of illusion. The first creates the illusion of separation through the physical body. The second, material desires and attachments. The third, mental limitations and restrictive beliefs. The fourth, emotional distortions like fear and anger. The fifth, the false personality and ego. The sixth, the illusion of linear time. And the seventh, the final separation from the divine source. In the Gnosticism perspective, each level represents a veil we need to transcend in our journey back to original consciousness. The process of enlightenment implies recognizing and crossing each of these veils, recovering lost aspects of our essential nature. Have you ever had that feeling that you're living a life that isn't really yours, as if you were following a script written by someone else? That's the intuitive perception of archontic systems operating in your reality. The good news is that despite their apparent power, the archons have a fundamental weakness. They cannot create, only distort. They don't possess the divine spark that dwells in every human being. Therefore, their control depends entirely on our ignorance and unconscious consent. Spiritual awakening begins when we recognize that we have a choice. We can withdraw our consent from the control system. Authentic mysticism has always taught practical techniques to identify and neutralize archontic influence, meditation to calm the mind and notice intrusive thoughts, contemplation to distinguish between inner truth and external conditioning, energetic practices to cleanse and strengthen our personal energy field. When you can observe your thoughts without completely identifying with them, you're already beginning to break archontic control. However, as we awaken to this deeper reality, an inevitable question arises. How did this manipulation begin? How were we initially deceived and convinced to accept this prison as our home? To understand this, we need to re-examine one of the most fundamental stories in our culture, the narrative of Adam and Eve and the true meaning of the human fall. The story you know about Adam and Eve is probably not even a shadow of the truth. Geez, it's mind-blowing when we discover what the original Gnostic texts really said about these characters. Far from being simple humans of flesh and bone, created from dust by a benevolent God, they represent fundamental cosmic principles. The original Adam, called Adam of Light in Gnostic texts, wasn't a physical being, but a luminous manifestation of the original divine consciousness. Imagine a humanoid, form composed entirely of radiant light, a perfect model of complete human potential. This celestial Adam contained all the attributes of the divine source: infinite wisdom, unconditional love, unlimited creative power. In the perspective of Gnostic occultism, this luminous being was the first attempt of divine consciousness to manifest in individuated form without losing its connection to the whole. When Yaldabaoth glimpsed this being of light, he was simultaneously amazed and terrified. Amazed by its beauty and perfection, terrified because he finally realized that something much greater and more powerful than himself existed. In a desperate act to maintain control, he and his archons decided to create an imperfect copy of this luminous being, a material body to imprison fragments of the divine light. It's as if they had built a cage of flesh to capture a bird made of pure light. Gnosticism teaches that this was the true beginning of humanity as we know it, not an act of divine love, but an attempt at cosmic kidnapping. The human body was originally designed as a sensory prison, with pleasurable and painful experiences, carefully calibrated to keep the soul distracted and identified with its physical form, forgotten of its true luminous nature. But the story gets even more fascinating when Eve enters the scene. In the original Gnostic texts, Eve doesn't emerge from Adam's rib. That's just the distorted version of the story. In fact, Eve represents the manifestation of divine wisdom, Sophia, in human form. While Adam symbolizes dormant spiritual potential, Eve embodies awakened wisdom and intuitive consciousness. She is essentially the principle of spiritual awakening in feminine form. Man, you can see how this interpretation completely changes the meaning of the original story, right? Instead of being a secondary and subordinate figure, Eve emerges as the bearer of gnosis, the direct and experiential knowledge of divine truth. She represents our innate intuition, that part of us that instinctively recognizes truth even when it's wrapped in layers of illusion and misinformation. When you have that inexplicable feeling that something isn't right with the official reality presented to you, it's your inner Eve awakening. And now we come to the most controversial part of the story, the famous fall caused by eating the forbidden fruit. In the Gnostic understanding, this act wasn't a tragic disobedience that condemned humanity, but precisely the opposite. The serpent, far from being a symbol of evil, represents the energy of spiritual awakening, the force of consciousness spiraling upward through energetic blockages. When the serpent invites Eve to eat from the fruit of knowledge, it's essentially inviting humanity to awaken from the hypnotic trance imposed by the archons. The awakening begins when we question the artificial limitations imposed on us. Think about it. Why would a truly loving and omnipotent God forbid access to knowledge? Only a tyrant fears informed and conscious subjects. The original sin wasn't the act of seeking knowledge, but the false creator's attempt to keep humanity in ignorance. The moment when Adam and Eve realize they are naked is actually the instant of awakening, when they recognize that their true nature was being concealed. The nakedness represents the vulnerability of realizing they had been deceived, that they had accepted a fabricated reality as true. And the supposed God's reaction: punishment, expulsion, curses, exactly the behavior expected from a tyrant whose control has been threatened, not from a divine source of unconditional love. Gnostic mysticism interprets the expulsion from Eden not as punishment for disobedience, but as the inevitable consequence of awakening. Upon beginning to see through the illusion, Adam and Eve could no longer comfortably inhabit the artificial world created for their imprisonment. Authentic spirituality teaches us that this process continues happening today. Every time a human being awakens to the truth and begins questioning control structures, they are metaphorically expelled from paradise of comfortable ignorance. But this awakening, although initially painful and disorienting, is the necessary first step toward true liberation. And who tried to continue this liberation process thousands of years later? A revolutionary master whose teachings were systematically distorted to serve the control system, the true Jesus, very different from the one presented by institutionalized religion. The figure of Jesus Christ that dominates the popular imagination is largely a carefully edited construction serving specific purposes. Oh my goodness, it's amazing how the original teachings were distorted over the centuries. In the Gnostic understanding, Jesus didn't come to the world to die for our sins or to establish a new hierarchical religion. He came as a messenger of cosmic consciousness, a revealer of history's best-kept secret, that we are all imprisoned in an artificial control system, separated from our true divine nature. Authentic Gnosticism sees Jesus as an illuminator, someone who came to bring light to the darkness of collective ignorance, a master of enlightenment who fully understood the illusory nature of this world and our true identity beyond it. The Gnostic Gospels, discovered at Nag Hammadi in 1945, offer a radically different view of Jesus' teachings. Instead of emphasizing sin, guilt, and the need for external salvation, they highlight direct knowledge, gnosis, as the path to liberation. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. This phrase takes on a much deeper meaning in this context. Truth doesn't refer to a set of doctrines to believe in, but to a direct experiential realization of our essential nature. It's like that revealing moment when you finally understand something that's been right in front of you all along. Jesus, according to Gnostic texts, didn't come to be worshipped as an exclusive God, but to awaken the dormant divinity in every human being. The kingdom of heaven is within you. He was literally pointing to the divine spark that dwells in each person regardless of religion, culture, or beliefs. Jesus' revolutionary message directly threatened the archontic control system. Think about it. What happens when someone begins teaching that spiritual authority isn't in temples, priests, or books, but in each person's direct experience? That each human being is essentially divine and needs no intermediaries to connect with the source. Such teaching completely subverts power structures. Gnostic occultist texts describe how the archons, operating through religious and political structures of the time, worked to silence and then distort this liberating message. The crucifixion, seen from this perspective, wasn't a necessary sacrifice, but a brutal attempt to silence a truth dangerous to the system. But what the archontic powers didn't understand is that Once planted, the seed of truth continues to grow even underground. The resurrection in Gnostic understanding wasn't a literal physical event, but a powerful symbol of spiritual awakening that transcends physical body death. Jesus demonstrated that our true essence, pure consciousness, cannot be destroyed, even when the physical vehicle is eliminated. I and the Father are one. In this statement, he wasn't claiming exclusive divine status, but demonstrating the ultimate realization that is the goal of every authentic spiritual journey. The reunification of individual consciousness with the universal source. Original Christian mysticism taught specific practices to achieve similar states of unified consciousness: meditation, contemplation, breathing exercises, and energetic techniques that were later suppressed or marginalized for not fitting into the institutional control structure. Have you ever wondered why so many practical teachings were removed from mainstream Christianity, leaving mostly moral rules and dogmatic beliefs? After Jesus' death, his original teachings continued to be transmitted in secret circles, away from the emerging religious establishment's eyes. However, with the passing centuries and the growth of the institutional church, these Gnostic teachings were systematically persecuted and eliminated. Entire libraries of ancient texts were destroyed, Gnostic communities were dispersed or exterminated, and a highly edited and controlled version of Christianity became the norm. It breaks your heart to think of how much precious knowledge was lost in this suppression process. Jesus' original spirituality was transformed into a hierarchical structure that, ironically, often operated in direct opposition to his fundamental teachings, emphasizing separation instead of unity, fear instead of love, external obedience instead of internal realization. The genuine awakening energy was channeled into control structures that, in essence, served the same archontic powers that Jesus had challenged. But despite centuries of suppression, truth has a resilient quality. It continues to emerge, generation after generation, finding new forms of expression, and perhaps most importantly, it continues to awaken within each person who sincerely seeks to understand the true nature of reality and themselves. This awakening isn't abstract or merely philosophical. It happens as a tangible transformation within individual consciousness, beginning with the perception that everything we consider external reality is actually a reflection of internal processes. All this cosmic narrative of gods, archons, beings of light, and celestial battles might seem distant from our everyday reality. But what if the greatest secret of all was that this entire drama is happening inside you, at this very moment? Boy, that's quite a twist in the story, isn't it? The deepest Gnosticism teaches that the external universe is actually a reflection of the internal battle for consciousness occurring in each human being. Yaldabaoth isn't just a distant cosmic entity. He is the human ego in its crudest and most unexamined form, that inner voice constantly saying, me, that considers itself the center of the universe, that fears anything threatening its illusion of control and separation. The ego, like Yaldabaoth, declares itself the supreme authority over its reality and rejects any suggestion that something greater, more encompassing than itself, might exist. The archons, in turn, manifest as specific patterns of thought and emotion that keep the ego in power. Have you noticed how certain negative thoughts seem to have a life of their own? How they automatically arise in response to specific situations, always creating the same repetitive patterns of behavior and experience? The tradition of Gnostic occultism identifies 7 main archontic patterns operating in the human psyche: fear, anger, pride, envy, apathy, lust, and ignorance. Each of these patterns creates a specific type of energetic prison, keeping consciousness trapped in repetitive cycles. True spiritual work consists of recognizing these patterns when they arise, not completely identifying with them, and gradually releasing the energy that was trapped in these repetitive cycles. It's like detecting an automatic program running in the background of your mind's computer. Once you identify it, you can choose to end it instead of letting it consume your energetic resources. The Adam of light, that perfect manifestation of divine consciousness, isn't lost in some distant celestial realm. He is your true self, your higher self beyond the ego's limitations. This is the aspect of your consciousness that knows at a deep intuitive level that you are much more than your body, your thoughts, your emotions, your beliefs, or your personal history. It's that sense of infinitude you sometimes experience in moments of great quietude or inspiration. When you feel inexplicably connected to everything, when the boundaries between you and the world seem to momentarily dissolve, you're getting a glimpse of your inner Adam of light. The awakening of consciousness is essentially a process of remembering, of recalling who you really are beyond the layers of conditioning and false identifications. It's not something you need to achieve or conquer. It's something you discover already being. As the ancient Gnostic proverb says, "Seek not to make yourself something you are not, for you already are everything you could wish to be." And Eve? In the inner journey, Eve represents your intuition, your innate wisdom, that part of you which naturally recognizes truth when it encounters it, without needing external proofs or arguments. Authentic spirituality has always valued this. Direct intuitive knowledge above mere accumulation of information or beliefs. When your inner Eve awakens, you begin trusting more in your own direct experience and less in external authorities to determine what's true. You develop an internal lie detector that immediately recognizes inconsistencies and manipulations in belief systems presented to you. When this intuitive awakening usually begins with small perceptions, moments of clarity when you think, "Wait a minute, this doesn't make sense," or "There's more going on here than I'm being told." These are the first nibbles at the fruit of knowledge, the first steps outside the archontic control matrix. The kingless realm mentioned in Gnostic texts isn't a physical place or even an external spiritual realm. It's a state of consciousness where you're no longer subject to the control of internal or external forces. It's a state of spiritual sovereignty where you recognize that the only true authority over your experience is your own awakened consciousness. Genuine mysticism has always taught that we don't need external saviors, gurus, masters, or gods to liberate us. We only need to awaken to what we already are. This awakening isn't a one-time event, but an ongoing process of progressive illumination, as layer after layer of illusion is gently dissolved by the light of consciousness. And the most beautiful aspect of this process is that it's available to everyone at any moment. It requires no affiliation with any specific religion, no elaborate rituals or secret initiations. It requires only the sincere intention to see beyond the veils and the courage to question what has always been presented to you as unquestionable. The true spiritual journey is both simple and deeply challenging. Simple because it requires nothing beyond what you already possess. Challenging because it demands that you abandon everything you believed yourself to be. The final invitation of Gnosticism isn't to believe a new story about creation or adopt a new set of spiritual practices. It's an invitation to awaken, here and now, to the truth of your being. This choice is always present at every moment, to continue sleeping in the comfort of illusion or to awaken to the sometimes disconcerting freedom of truth. Like in the ancient metaphor of the red and blue pill, you can choose to return to the comfortable dream or awaken to reality as it is. Awakening doesn't promise constant comfort or perpetual happiness. It promises authenticity, freedom, and the opportunity to experience life in its fullness, without the distorted filters of conditioned perception. And perhaps Gnosticism's most radical message is that this awakening isn't just a distant possibility or an elevated spiritual goal. It's your birthright, your natural state before the world taught you to sleep. The question isn't whether you can awaken, but whether you will choose to do so, and this choice presents itself at every moment, in every situation, with every thought and emotion that arises in your consciousness. Will you continue reacting automatically, following the programmed archontic patterns, or will you pause, breathe, and choose a conscious response aligned with your true nature? This is the real battlefield where the cosmic war between light and darkness is finally decided, not in distant celestial realms, but in the arena of your own consciousness. The Gnostic secrets I've shared aren't just ancient stories or allegories. They're practical keys to a profound transformation of your consciousness here and now. So what are you going to do with this knowledge? Will you leave it as just another interesting piece of information, or will you allow it to awaken something truly revolutionary within you? Think about it. If you're really a divine spark, temporarily forgotten of your true nature, how does that change the way you live each moment? What you would be possible if you began to actively question the limitations you've accepted as reality? The true power of spiritual awakening lies in application, in recognizing the archontic patterns when they arise in your mind and consciously choosing a different response. Start today. The next time you feel fear, anger, or any limiting emotion, pause and ask, is this really my truth, or is it an automatic program running in my consciousness? This simple act of questioning is already the beginning of liberation. If this content resonated with you, don't keep this knowledge to yourself. Share, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so we can continue together on this journey of awakening. Remember, the true revolution doesn't happen out there but in the arena of your own consciousness.